How's it going, everyone? My name is Falling Hurts, and today I'm going to be doing a review for As Dusk Falls, a game that I played only off of Xbox Game Pass, so I'll let that be known now. I didn't pay the $30 for it. But even given the subscription model price, I think it's important to know how I felt about it. Or, well, I mean, maybe you think it's important, maybe you don't, but either way, I played it, and I'm going to tell you what I thought, so here we go. So first off, the game is published by the Xbox Game Studios, so you're going to get it on the Xbox or PC platforms, and that's going to be coming from Interior Night as the developer. And the basic premise from the store page reads as this: explore the entangled lives of two families across 30 years in an original interactive drama. Starting in 1998 with a robbery gone wrong, the characters' lives depend on the choices you make. And it's got very positive reviews on Steam specifically. And the other need to knows for you to get out of the way are that the game is $29.99 US, $30, and that's going to take you about 6 hours to complete, maybe slightly longer if you're really taking your time. But this isn't really a point-and-click game for the most part, like Telltale's The Walking Dead, where you have those moments where you can walk around in a 3D space. This isn't ever really like that, so you don't have a lot of time wasting points. You're really on rails the whole time. And while that is, to me, a negative, I think the game could have breathed more throughout it. I have a lot of positives to go off of that too. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right into my review. And starting off the bat, I really like this game. It's something that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to truly appreciate going in, but I found a lot of things to really enjoy, though there are some caveats to that. And I'll get into those in just a few moments. One thing that I will say I didn't interact with much in this is the multiplayer. So you can really just kind of take that to the side, but it is pretty much a single player game. The only difference is you can have your friends download an app if you're playing in the same room, or I'm pretty sure even Twitch integration, which basically makes it to where you can choose what you want to pick through the decisions on the game, whether that be dialogue choices or major decisions. And then there are a few overrides for the main player if, everyone's just acting out of pocket and picking something completely stupid. Anyways, As Dusk Falls is a game where you're basically only making dialogue decisions or just major gameplay choices as a whole, with the occasional, hey, my character is standing and I need to look for things around the room, but that's pretty few and far between. But then we've also got the occasional QuickTime events, which are pretty simple with the controls. I would have liked to see a lot more as far as that goes. But with the 6-hour playtime, I have to say, the use of all of these gameplay mechanics is done masterfully to keep me entertained the whole time. The dialogue is always interesting, you're always making decisions. It's probably got to be something as much as almost every 20 to 30 seconds, if not sooner than that for some parts of the game. You're making decisions all the time, and that keeps you entertained. That keeps it to where, while player agency isn't always there, you're always making decisions, and that's what feels great in this game. Another point of the gameplay that I really appreciated is that the game really expects you to pay attention. And I don't just mean that, hey, you need to pay attention to what the character is saying before you choose a dialogue choice. I mean, yeah, of course that's important too, but there's instances in the game where the game does try to trick you, and you need to be paying attention or you're gonna get caught up, and it's gonna catch you lacking, bro. For instance, there's a point in the beginning of the game where the start-off robbery happens, so while you had previously seen the slip with the code for the safe on it, you didn't have it for whatever reason by the time you got to the room. So you had to have remembered it and actually been able to do it in time for the robbery to be completed. Thankfully for me, I was able to complete it in time, but there are other parts in the game where I got completely caught off guard. That was one of the few times it felt a little more puzzly, but there are times where just dialogue choices, if you say the wrong thing because of something you didn't notice, there is a wrong answer here. It's not like, oh, every choice is right, yada yada yada. No, there are definitely some wrong choices, and you can make them. But as I look back on the gameplay, I can't help but feel like there was something missing. Again, I really do think moments where you could have kind of explored around a little bit, more of leaning into that point-and-click nature, would have really helped the game in a couple of places, really padding out the gameplay to 7 hours, which isn't something that I needed, don't get me wrong. One of my favorite games is under 4 hours long. Short games are fine, and that's not my issue whatsoever. I'm just saying that there are some points in time where I felt like we could have spent a little more time with some of these characters before we had to make decisions that decided their entire lives. But overall, I thought the gameplay was pretty serviceable. That's the best way I could say it. It's, nothing too crazy. The QuickTime events aren't too hard. I don't think there's enough of those moments where the game tries to catch you up. But the dialogue and the way everything works out, very quickly, very fast-paced, it really keeps you entertained, and I never got bored with the game. That is one thing I will say, and I appreciate. And with that being said, I'd like to go right into my next point, and that's the story itself. The story of the game is split into 6 chapters, so roughly an hour apiece, and it is Book 1 and Book 2. Now, Book 1 is the first 3 chapters, Book 2 is the second chapters, and Book 1 pretty much revolves around the actual hotel stuff right after the robbery, and that is pretty how do I want to say this? Book 1 is entirely more interesting than Book 2, in my opinion. But Book 2 was pretty interesting up until the end. I really do think the game fumbled here at the very end. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I got a very unsatisfying ending for mine. I mean, it did the thing at the end where it kind of, reveals what happened to everyone in your story. It shows everyone's ending, all the characters that were important anyway. And I was okay with all of it. Like, I made the decisions I made, and I was fine with all of it. But there was one thing that was like, what's going on here? And it definitely felt like sequel baiting, 100%. So maybe As Dusk Falls 2, or shit, As Morning Comes? I don't know what we're gonna call it. But one thing I will say is that the story is really well put together. You start with the simple story of these two families and how they're going to interact with one another, and while that is pretty crazy in and of itself, then you get into stuff like you're layering in some, flashbacks, backstories to some of these characters, making them more intriguing and more important, and one of the flashbacks even put my relationship and how I felt about a certain character onto a completely different plane of existence. And I thought that was so cool. When nothing had happened in real time, it was just like, oh shit, he's gonna remember what she did or whatever. And I just remembered after that, I was like, holy crap. But that leads me into my next point. I didn't really like most of the characters of this game. So you pretty much have 3 protagonists that you're gonna play as throughout the game. There was one point where you do play as another person, but that was one scene, and that was a really good scene, but it wasn't that crazy important in the end, except for deciding one person's fate. When it comes to Vince, I didn't really like the wife. I mean, the daughter was fine, who was the other protagonist in the later timeline of the game, as well as the father. And then you've got Jay, the other main protagonist from the other side, and he's got his 2 brothers, his mother, and then you've got characters like the sheriff. And the thing is, I didn't like any of them until you get to the later parts of the game where there are a few interesting characters that are introduced. I just really didn't enjoy it. And you may think this is a complete negative, but it's not. These types of choices matter narrative games are very great when it comes to deciding the outcomes of these characters. Imagine a timeline where you have the choices to make, but everyone's life depends on you and you don't like them. I'm not saying everyone's not going to like these characters. I looked at my decisions. At the end of the chapters, it tells you what % of people did what you did. And most of the time, it was either 50-50 for what a lot of the things I made, or hell, I even had some 30%ers because, damn, I felt really strongly about some of these characters. Don't get me wrong, I didn't treat all characters poorly. I don't think that's why I got the negative ending that I got. But regardless, it was super fun to say something that you wouldn't normally say in a game where you're trying to be good. And it's like sending a risky text to someone, you kind of throw the controller down like, oh, what are they going to say next? You know what I mean? And it was really actually pretty satisfying. And the game reacts in a lot of crazy different ways. Something you can't always expect, and for that, I give it a lot of props. I really like this game. Again, I would have liked to have a couple more compelling characters outside of the protagonists, and not just feeling like a sandbox to make a bunch of crazy decisions that impact these people in weird ways. Like, this should be my family. I should be taking care of them. And while I did feel some obligation to do that as like, oh, this is my family, I have to do it, a lot of them were just pricks, and I didn't want to. I'd have to choose between a rock and a hard place a lot of the time. And while I don't think the characters were particularly my thing, one thing that I did really enjoy was the voice acting itself. There were a few weak points, but when it came to the characters that were really great, there were never any diminishing parts of their act. In the entire 6 hours, there were characters that were on screen for minutes or hours, and they were all great, and I really do appreciate that. However, outside of sound design, there isn't really too much to write home about as far as the audio goes. Basic clunks and different sounds like that do their job, but it's never anything super intense. The music or licensed tracks in the game are okay. I mean, if I hear the main menu track again, I'll probably know it, but that's about it. And then you've got the little, sounds that go throughout the game, the little musical cues when something crazy happens. I guess you might understand that might, stick in your head over time, but that's really about it. Otherwise, it's pretty forgettable as far as soundtrack goes. And to me, as someone who always appreciates the soundtracks in these types of games, that is a big negative for me, honestly. And while we talked about the audio, we've talked about the story, we've talked about the gameplay. We haven't talked about the other thing that really sets the game apart, and that's the visuals. So As Dusk Falls is in it's in a 3D environment, I guess, but the character models are 2D and they are static, but they move, I don't want to say frame by frame like they're moving every second, but they move to show the different kind of emotions when the emotions do change. and they don't stay still for too long, so it never feels like you're just looking at, like, say, a cardboard cutout of someone or anything like that, so don't worry about that. But I was really I was wary at first. I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this, and pretty much any living thing that moves are going to be the kind of cardboard cutouts that you'd expect. In the end, I think it looks really good, and one thing that I will say that I appreciate is that when you get real life acting, or like in a movie, you get the occasional shot where you get like the weird camera angle where someone has a double chin, or they make a face that's just not quite right. Well, that is removed from video games a lot of the time, unless developers go out of their way to do that in a 3D asset or something like that, which is super, super, super rare. Now imagine how rare it also would be for someone who has to draw these awkward animations, and when they're only going off of so many different, keyframe visual points, it's really impressive that they took the time to kind of draw the unflattering moments of these characters. They could have just went as simple as, oh yeah, this is when the character looks best here and here, but I just really appreciate that, I don't know, it's silly, I guess, but I really appreciate that they went the distance with it. Though for as artsy as it is, I never fully classify this game as like a visual showcase in any meaningful way. There's a couple pretty backgrounds, don't get me wrong, but as far as the character models interacting with those backgrounds, there's never any great shots to take, like a screenshot, unless they're off the screen completely. Another thing I'd say is that the 3D models that are actually in the game really aren't that good. I mean, I'd like to say they fit with the art style in a way, but they really just don't. It feels like the 3D environment and the 2D are two different quality states. The 2D is superb, amazing, and the 3D is down just a little bit. I'm not saying they had to go for ultra realism, because that's obviously not what they were going for at all with the characters. However, I believe if they're going to go with, the kind of simpler visual style of 3D assets, I think it would have been really important for them to hit the frame rates and different, performance goals that they should have had. Playing on the Xbox, I noticed probably 2 or 3 times throughout the entire story where when something crazy happened, I would get drops in frame rate, as well as other smaller points where it would cut to a new scene and there'd be, like, say, a car moving or something. It would always stutter for just a minute, and it was super unappealing, and it took me out of the scene every time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if the visuals are going to look as they do, I would have thought it would have been simpler enough to at least prioritize frame rate in a way that didn't have these dips. But overall, it didn't mar my enjoyment of the game too much. And with that being said, I'd like to hop right into my final verdict. As Dusk Falls is a pretty interesting game. Whether it be the unique visual style of the 2D assets and the 3D world, or the very, very interesting story, there's a lot to look at and appreciate here. Tense moments in the story are only bolstered by the voiceover work that's being done, however the rest of the audio does fall pretty flat. The gameplay itself was something that I didn't believe was going to be enjoyable as it was, but due to the fast-paced nature of the gameplay as well as the time to play, it really did pull together in a way that was a pretty fun package that I never got bored with, even if I do think there are some places that it could have improved. Overall, As Dusk Falls is a pretty good game, but I don't think it's anywhere near perfect. When it comes to something like Game Pass, I definitely believe it's worth your time, especially only being 6 hours, but at the $30 price point, I can still see this being worth it for a lot of people. However, there's a lot of people that don't like these type of story narrative games, and for that I say, honestly, don't, not for $30. If it's on a good sale or something, Game Pass, yes, that's great. But if this is your thing, if story and narrative decisions are your thing, even though I don't think the game completely stuck the landing, I really do recommend trying out the game. So with that being said, my name is Falling Hearts, and this has been my review of As Dusk Falls. I had a lot of fun with this game. I played it with my fiance, and we really enjoyed it. I think she did too. She also didn't like the ending and how kind of abrupt it was. But regardless, let me know what you think of the game, or if you haven't played it, let me know if this review was helpful. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, bye.